The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Maria Santos pushed through the glass doors of the base commissary, her worn canvas shopping bag slung over one shoulder. At 47, she moved with the economical grace of someone who had learned long ago not to waste energy on unnecessary movements. Her graying brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her civilian clothes, jeans, and a faded navy t-shirt gave no hint of the extraordinary career that lay behind her unremarkable appearance. She had been shopping for groceries like any other Tuesday evening, thinking about the dinner she would cook for herself in the small apartment she rented off base. After 25 years of military service, retirement still felt strange. The quiet felt strange. The absence of mission briefings and equipment checks and the constant awareness that lives depended on your decisions felt strange. But she was adapting the way she had always adapted to whatever life threw at her. The commissary was nearly empty at this hour, just a few other military families picking up last-minute items before the store closed. Maria moved through the aisles methodically, her mental shopping list as organized as everything else in her life. Pasta, marinara sauce, ground turkey, fresh vegetables. Simple, healthy food that would fuel her morning run and evening workout routine. Even in retirement, she maintained the physical standards that had carried her through 2.5 decades as one of the Navy's most elite warriors. Few people knew her real story. When she had transitioned out of active duty 6 months ago, she had deliberately chosen to keep a low profile. The legend of Ghost, the SEAL operative who had completed more high-value target missions than almost anyone in the team's history, remained classified. Her neighbors knew her as a quiet woman who kept her lawn perfectly maintained and always waved hello. Her colleagues at the VA hospital, where she now worked as a counselor, knew her as someone who understood what combat veterans had experienced, but they didn't know the extent of her own service record. That was exactly how Maria preferred it. She had never needed recognition or glory. The missions had been reward enough. The knowledge that she had helped protect innocent lives, that she had brought her teammates home safely, that she had served her country with distinction, that was what mattered. The rest was just noise. As she reached for a box of whole grain pasta, Maria's trained awareness picked up something that made her pause. 25 years of operating in hostile territory had given her an almost supernatural ability to read situations, to sense when something was off. The feeling was subtle but unmistakable, the same internal alarm that had kept her alive in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. 3 aisles over, she could hear raised voices. A man's voice, aggressive and demanding. A woman's voice, trying to de-escalate. Maria finished selecting her pasta and moved quietly toward the sound, her movements as silent and purposeful as they had been during countless reconnaissance missions. What she saw made her jaw tighten with controlled anger. Corporal Lisa Chun, a young supplies specialist Maria recognized from around base, was backed against a display of canned goods. Standing over her was Marine Staff Sergeant Derek Reeves, a man Maria had observed before and immediately disliked. Reeves was the type of soldier who confused aggression with strength, who used his rank and physical size to intimidate others. He was everything Maria despised in military leadership. "Come on, sweetheart," Reeves was saying, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a predator who thought his prey was trapped. "One drink. What's the harm in that? We're both adults here." "I've already said no, Staff Sergeant," Lisa replied, her voice steady, but Maria could hear the underlying tension. "I need to finish my shopping and get back to the barracks." Reeves moved closer, effectively trapping Lisa against the shelving. His broad shoulders and 6'2" frame created an intimidating wall. "You know, Chun, you've been playing hard to get for weeks now. But I'm a patient man, and I always get what I want." Maria felt the familiar cold focus settle over her, the same mental state she had entered before every dangerous mission. Her breathing slowed and deepened. Her awareness expanded to take in every detail of the situation. The exits, the potential witnesses, the exact positioning of both individuals, the best approach angles. In her mind, she was already running through tactical options. But she also recognized this as a delicate situation. She was retired now, a civilian contractor. Reeves was still active duty, and he outranked most people on this base. A direct confrontation could complicate things for everyone involved, especially for Vixixen. Maria needed to handle this carefully. She moved into the aisle as if she was simply continuing her shopping, selecting a jar of marinara sauce while positioning herself where she could intervene if necessary. From this angle, she could see that Reeve had placed one hand on the shelf beside Lisa's head, leaning in close enough that the young corporal was clearly uncomfortable. "Staff Sergeant," Lisa said again, trying to step sideways, but Reeves moved to block her path. "Relax," he said with a laugh that made Maria's skin crawl. "I'm not going to bite, unless you want me to." His other hand moved toward Lisa's arm. That was enough. Maria cleared her throat and stepped into view. "Excuse me," she said in the polite but firm tone she had perfected during diplomatic missions. "I think you're blocking access to the pasta sauce." Reeves turned, his expression shifting from predatory confidence to irritation at the interruption. When he saw Maria, a middle-aged woman in civilian clothes, his irritation transformed into the particular type of dismissive arrogance she had encountered too many times in her career. "Lady, we're having a conversation here," he said. "Find another aisle." Maria smiled pleasantly and stepped closer. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize this was a private conversation area. Though it does seem like the young lady would prefer to continue her shopping." Her voice remained perfectly polite, but there was something in her tone that made Lisa look at her with sudden hope. Reeves' eyes narrowed. He was clearly unused to being questioned, especially by someone he perceived as a powerless civilian. "Listen, sweetheart, this doesn't concern you. Mind your own business." The word "sweetheart" hung in the air like a challenge. Maria had been called worse by better men, but something about the casual disrespect, combined with the way he was intimidating Vixixen, triggered a response that was part professional outrage and part personal experience. "You're right," Maria said, her tone still conversational. "It's not my business. But I was just thinking, Corporal Chun looks like she has somewhere to be. Don't you, Corporal?" Lisa nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. I really do need to get going." But Reeves wasn't finished. His sense of entitlement and authority had been challenged, and his response was predictable. "Hey," he said, stepping toward Maria now, his voice dropping to a more threatening register. "I told you to mind your own business. Are you deaf, or it's just stupid?" The transformation in Maria's demeanor was so subtle that most people would have missed it. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Her weight settled differently on her feet. Her hands, which had been casually holding her shopping basket, now hung loose at her sides. 25 years of the most intensive combat training in the world had prepared her for exactly this type of escalation. But her voice remained calm. "I'm neither deaf nor stupid, Staff Sergeant. I'm just a woman trying to buy groceries who happened to notice that your conversation partner seems ready to leave. Perhaps you could continue this discussion another time." Reeves laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, I see. Another feminist trying to stick her nose where it doesn't belong. Well, let me explain something to you, lady. I'm a United States Marine. I've served 3 combat tours. I don't take orders from some random civilian woman who thinks she knows better." He took another step closer to Maria, close enough that his intimidation tactic should have been effective, close enough that most people would have backed down, close enough that he could use his size and military bearing to make his point. What he didn't know was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his military career. Maria looked up at him with the same pleasant expression she had been wearing throughout the conversation. 3 combat tours, she repeated thoughtfully. "That's impressive. You must have seen some serious action." "More than you could imagine, sweetheart," Reeves said, his confidence returning. He had found his rhythm now, the familiar dynamic where his military service and physical presence gave him automatic authority. "So maybe you should show some respect and walk away before you get in over your head. You know," Maria said conversationally, "I've always wondered what it would be like to serve in combat. It must take real courage." She paused, as if considering something. "Though I suppose there are different kinds of courage, aren't there? There's the courage it takes to face an enemy who can fight back. And then there's the courage it takes to pick on someone you think can't fight back." Reeves' face flushed red. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "Oh, nothing really," Maria replied. "I was just thinking about courage. and about how sometimes the people who talk about it the most might not be the ones who actually have it. The insult was delivered so mildly that it took Reeve a moment to process it. When he did, his reaction was exactly what Maria had expected. "You've got some mouth on you," he said, moving even closer. "Maybe it's time someone taught you when to keep it shut." Lisa Chun had been watching this exchange with growing alarm. "Staff Sergeant, please," she said. "This isn't necessary." "I'll just go. Stay right where you are, Chin," Reeve snapped without taking his eyes off Maria. "This civilian needs to learn some respect." Maria nodded, as if she was agreeing with him. "You're absolutely right. Respect is very important. In fact, I was just thinking about how respect is something you earn, not something you demand." She looked directly into his eyes with the steady, unflinching gaze that had once made enemy combatants reconsider their life choices. "And I was wondering what exactly you think you've done to earn it." The question hit Reeves like a physical blow. In his world, his rank, his size, and his aggressive personality had always been enough. The idea that someone, especially a woman, would question his right to automatic deference was completely outside his experience. "I've earned the right to respect from civilians like you," he said, his voice rising. "I put my life on the line for this country while you were probably sitting at home watching TV." "Probably," Maria agreed pleasantly. "After all, what would I know about serving my country?" The innocent question somehow felt like another challenge, though Reeves couldn't quite put his finger on why. There was something about this woman that didn't add up. Her calmness in the face of his intimidation was unsettling. Most people, especially women, would have been backing away by now. But she stood her ground as if she had every right to be there, as if his size and aggressive posturing meant nothing to her. "You want to know what you should know?" he said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You should know that when a Marine tells you to mind your own business, you do it. You should know that when someone with actual military experience is talking, you listen. And you should know that if you keep running your mouth, you might find out what it feels like to—" He never finished the sentence. Because in that moment, Maria Santos decided that Staff Sergeant Derek Reeves had revealed everything she needed to know about his character, and it was time to begin his education. The moment stretched between them like a taut wire. Reeves stood over Maria with all the confidence of a man who had never been challenged by someone he perceived as defenseless. His fist was partially raised, his body language screaming intimidation and barely contained violence. He was accustomed to this exact scenario playing out in his favor. The moment when his target would back down, apologize, and scurry away with their tail between their legs. Instead, Maria Santos smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed an opportunity they had been waiting for, though they hadn't realized it until this moment. It was the smile of a professional who had just watched an amateur make a critical tactical error. "You might find out what it feels like to what?" Maria asked softly, her head tilted slightly, as if she was genuinely curious about how he planned to finish his threat. Reeves faltered for just an instant. Something in her tone, in the way she had asked the question, caught him off guard. But his ego quickly reasserted itself. "To deal with someone who doesn't take disrespect from civilians," he finished lamely. "Ah," Maria nodded as if this clarified everything. "And how exactly do you typically deal with disrespectful civilians, Staff Sergeant?" "I'm asking because I want to make sure I understand the situation properly." Lisa Chun stood frozen against the canned goods display, watching this surreal conversation unfold. She had expected the confrontation to escalate into shouting, or for the older woman to back away in fear. Instead, the mysterious woman seemed to be conducting some kind of interview with her would-be intimidator. Reeves, meanwhile, was beginning to feel like he was losing control of the situation, though he couldn't quite understand how. "Look, lady, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but I'm not playing any games," Maria interrupted gently. "I'm just trying to understand your position. You're telling me that as a Marine, you feel it's appropriate to threaten physical violence against an unarmed civilian woman in a grocery store. Is that correct?" The way she phrased it made Reeves suddenly aware that other shoppers might be listening. His eyes darted around the store, noting for the first time that their conversation had attracted some attention. A staff member was watching nervously from behind the deli counter. An elderly couple had stopped their shopping to observe the confrontation. I wasn't threatening anything, he said quickly. I was just explaining how respect works. I see, Maria said thoughtfully. So, when you said I might find out what it feels like to deal with you, that was you explaining respect, not threatening violence. That's right. Good. I'm glad we clarified that. Because for a moment, I thought you might be the kind of person who uses his physical size and military training to intimidate people who can't defend themselves. But, obviously, a Marine with 3 combat tours would never do something so cowardly. The word cowardly hit Reeves like a slap. His face flushed an even deeper shade of red, and his hands clenched into fists. What did you just call me? I didn't call you anything, Maria replied innocently. I was just saying that obviously you're not the kind of person who would use your military training to bully civilians. Because that would be cowardly. And you're clearly not a coward. It was masterfully done. She had insulted him while appearing to compliment him. And now if he responded aggressively, he would be proving her point. Reeves stood there for a moment, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, trying to figure out how to respond. You're trying to provoke me, he finally said. Am I? Maria looked genuinely surprised. I thought I was agreeing with you. You said you were explaining respect. I said that obviously you weren't threatening anyone. We seem to be on the same page. Lisa Chan found herself fighting back a smile, despite her fear. Whatever was happening here, this mysterious woman was systematically dismantling Staff Sergeant Reeves' intimidation tactics without raising her voice or showing any sign of distress. Reeves, however, was not amused. His sense of dominance was slipping away, and he didn't know how to get it back. You know what? I've had enough of your smart mouth. Maybe it's time someone taught you a lesson about respect. He reached out to grab Maria's arm. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but to everyone watching, it seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Reeves' hand moved toward her, Maria stepped slightly to one side, a movement so small it looked like she was simply adjusting her stance. But the shift in position meant that Reeves' grab missed her arm entirely. Off balance from his own momentum, he stumbled forward. Maria's left hand came up in what appeared to be a defensive gesture, but her fingers found a pressure point on his wrist with surgical precision. The pain was instantaneous and overwhelming, not the kind of pain that caused damage, but the kind that caused complete loss of function in his arm. Simultaneously, her right hand moved to steady him as he stumbled, but her grip found another pressure point on his shoulder. To any observer, it would have looked like she was trying to help him keep his balance. In reality, she had just applied techniques that turned his own nervous system against him. Reeves found himself suddenly unable to move his right arm and experiencing a level of pain he had never imagined possible. His knees buckled, and he would have fallen if Maria hadn't been helping to hold him up. Careful there, she said with apparent concern, maintaining her grip on the pressure points. You don't want to hurt yourself. To everyone watching, it appeared that the staff sergeant had simply lost his balance, and the woman was helping to steady him. No one could see the precise finger positions that were currently sending waves of agony through his nervous system. What are you doing to me? Reeves gasped, his face pale with shock and pain. I'm making sure you don't fall, Maria replied in a voice loud enough for the other shoppers to hear. Then, she leaned closer and spoke in a whisper that only he could hear. These are pressure points that control nerve function. I could increase the pressure slightly, and you would lose consciousness. I could adjust my grip, and you would lose sensation in your entire right side for several hours. Or I could shift my thumb just a fraction of an inch, and you would experience pain so intense that you would beg me to knock you unconscious just to make it stop. Reeves' eyes widened with terror and confusion. Who are you? Maria's expression remained pleasantly concerned for the benefit of their audience, but her whispered words were cold as winter steel. I'm someone who spent 25 years learning how to deal with bullies, predators, and men who think their size gives them the right to hurt other people. I'm someone who has killed enemy combatants with my bare hands. And I'm someone who is very tired of watching men like you abuse their position and authority. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. Now, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to release these pressure points, and you're going to apologize to Corporal Chun for your inappropriate behavior. Then you're going to leave this store, and you're going to think very carefully about how you treat people in the future. Do we understand each other? Reeves nodded frantically, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. Good, Maria said, and released the pressure points. The relief was immediate but temporary. As feeling returned to his arm and the pain subsided, Reeves was left with the knowledge that this woman, this unremarkable-looking civilian woman, had just demonstrated capabilities that terrified him. He straightened up slowly, his eyes never leaving Maria's face. The confident bully was gone, replaced by someone who suddenly understood that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. He started, then looked over at Lisa Chun, who was watching the entire scene with amazement. Corporal Chun, I apologize for my behavior. It was inappropriate. Lisa nodded, still not entirely sure what she had just witnessed. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. Reeves looked back at Maria one more time. There were so many questions he wanted to ask, but the look in her eyes told him that this conversation was over. I should go, he said. Yes, Maria agreed pleasantly. You should. He backed away slowly, like someone retreating from a dangerous animal, then turned and walked quickly toward the exit. As he reached the door, he looked back once more. Maria was calmly selecting pasta sauce as if nothing had happened. Lisa Chen approached her cautiously. Mom, I thank you. But what just happened? Who are you? Maria looked up with the same friendly expression she had worn throughout the entire encounter. Oh, I'm just someone who doesn't like bullies. My name is Maria Santos. I work at the VA hospital now. But how did you... what you did to him? Lisa struggled to find the words. I took a few self-defense classes over the years, Maria said with a slight smile. You'd be surprised what you can learn when you put your mind to it. It was technically true, though describing 25 years of the most advanced combat training in the world as a few self-defense classes was perhaps the understatement of the century. Will he come after me later? Or after you? Lisa asked, genuine concern in her voice. Maria considered this question seriously. No, she said finally. I don't think Staff Sergeant Reeves will be bothering anyone for a while. And if he does, you have my permission to give him my name and tell him that Maria Santos says hello. There was something in the way she said it that made Lisa believe her completely. Could I get her contact information? In case I need to file a report or anything. Maria reached into her purse and pulled out a business card from the VA hospital. Of course, though I suspect this incident will resolve itself without any formal paperwork. As Lisa took the card, she noticed something interesting. The woman's hands were calloused in specific patterns that suggested extensive experience with weapons and physical training. Her forearms, visible now that she had pushed up her sleeves while shopping, showed the kind of muscle definition that came from years of serious physical conditioning. Maria Santos, Lisa read from the card. Veteran counselor. She looked up. You're a veteran too. I am, Maria confirmed. What branch? Navy, Maria said simply. Lisa waited for more information, but it was clear that was all she was going to get. Which was fine. She had learned enough to know that Staff Sergeant Reeves had picked the wrong person to mess with, and that was all that mattered. Thank you, she said again. Really? Thank you. You're welcome, Maria replied. And Lisa, if anyone ever makes you feel uncomfortable like that again, don't hesitate to speak up. You have every right to feel safe, and there are people who will support you. After Lisa left, Maria finished her shopping in peaceful silence. The other customers in the store were discussing what they had witnessed, but their interpretations varied wildly. Some thought they had seen a medical emergency. Others believed they had watched a minor altercation that was quickly resolved. None of them had any idea they had just witnessed one of the most highly trained warriors in American military history provide a masterclass in conflict resolution. As Maria drove home, she reflected on the encounter. She hadn't planned on revealing even that much of her capabilities, but something about Reeves' behavior had triggered her protective instincts. The way he had cornered Lisa Chun, the casual entitlement in his voice, the assumption that his size and rank gave him the right to intimidate others. It represented everything she had fought against during her career. She thought about the thousands of hours she had spent in training, learning to be a weapon against America's enemies. She thought about the missions where those skills had been used to protect innocent people and eliminate threats to national security. She had never expected to use those abilities in a grocery store to deal with a predatory Marine, but she felt no regret about the choice she had made. Staff Sergeant Derek Reeves had learned something important today, though Maria doubted he fully understood it yet. He had learned that his assumptions about power, authority, and vulnerability might be dangerously wrong. He had learned that the quiet woman buying pasta might have capabilities that would terrify him. And he had learned that his behavior had consequences. What he hadn't learned yet was exactly who Maria Santos really was. But he was about to find out. Derek Reeves didn't sleep that night. He lay in his barracks bunk staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with questions that had no comfortable answers. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt those steel fingers finding pressure points he didn't even know existed, experienced again that moment of absolute helplessness when his own nervous system had turned against him. Who was Maria Santos? How had she done what she did? And why did he have the growing suspicion that his encounter with her was far from over? By 0500 hours, he had given up on sleep entirely. He dressed quickly and made his way to the base gym, hoping that physical exertion might clear his head and restore some of his confidence. But even as he went through his usual workout routine, bench press, squats, military press, he couldn't shake the memory of how effortlessly she had controlled him. He was a Marine. He had served 3 combat tours. He was 6'2" and weighed 220 pounds of muscle. He had been through Marine Corps martial arts program training. He was not someone who could be easily handled by a middle-aged woman in a grocery store. Except that's exactly what had happened. After his workout, Reeves showered and headed to the base mess hall for breakfast. His usual table of fellow Marines was already there, and they greeted him with the typical ribbing and conversation that marked the start of another day. But Reeves found himself distracted, barely participating in their discussions about weekend plans and upcoming training exercises. "Yo, Reeves," called out Corporal Martinez, one of his more perceptive teammates. "You look like hell, man." "Rough night. Just couldn't sleep," Reeves replied, stirring his eggs around on his plate without much interest in eating them. "Maybe you need to get laid," suggested Sergeant Williams with a laugh. "When's the last time you went out and found yourself some company?" The comment hit closer to home than Williams could have known. Reeves thought about Lisa Chun, about how his evening at the commissary was supposed to have gone, about how it had instead become the most humiliating experience of his military career. "Yeah, maybe," he said noncommittally. But as breakfast continued, an idea began to form in his mind. He couldn't let this go. He couldn't just pretend that what happened at the commissary was normal or acceptable. Maria Santos had assaulted him. That's what it was, really. She had used some kind of martial arts technique to cause him pain and threaten him. The fact that no one else had realized what was happening didn't change the reality of the situation. He was a Marine staff sergeant. She was a civilian. There were proper channels for dealing with this kind of thing. After breakfast, Reeves made his way to the base security office. The military police had jurisdiction over incidents involving military personnel, and surely they would take his complaint seriously. He rehearsed his story as he walked, focusing on the facts. A civilian woman had physically assaulted him at the commissary. He would leave out the context about Lisa Chun. That would just complicate things unnecessarily. The desk sergeant at the MP station was a career military man named Peterson who had seen every type of complaint imaginable during his 20 years of service. When Reeves walked in requesting to file a report, Peterson prepared himself for another routine incident report. "What's the nature of the complaint, Staff Sergeant?" Peterson asked, pulling out the appropriate paperwork. "I was assaulted yesterday evening at the base commissary," Reeves said, "by a civilian woman." Peterson's pen stopped moving. In all his years of service, he had heard many assault complaints involving civilian women, but they almost never went in the direction Reeves was suggesting. "Could you be more specific about what happened?" Reeves launched into his prepared account. He described going to the commissary for groceries. He mentioned having a conversation with another service member. He explained how Maria Santos had interfered in their conversation, escalated the situation, and then physically assaulted him using some kind of martial arts technique. "She grabbed my wrist and shoulder and did something that caused extreme pain," Reeves explained. "I couldn't move my arm. She threatened to cause more pain if I didn't comply with her demands." Peterson listened to the account with growing skepticism. The story had gaps that didn't make sense, and Reeves' body language suggested he was leaving out important details. "This conversation you were having with the other service member," Peterson said. "What was the nature of that conversation?" "Just general military discussion," Reeves said vaguely. "I see. And this civilian woman, Maria Santos, just randomly decided to interfere in your conversation?" "That's right. And you're telling me that this woman, who you describe as middle-aged, was able to physically overpower you?" Reeves bristled at the implicit skepticism. "She used some kind of martial arts. Pressure points or something. I've never seen anything like it." Peterson made a note on his report form, but his expression suggested he was far from convinced. "Do you have any witnesses to this alleged assault?" "Corporal Chun was there. She saw the whole thing." "The same Corporal Chun you were having this general military discussion with?" "Yes." Peterson put down his pen and looked directly at Reeves. 20 years of military police work had given him excellent instincts about when someone was lying or omitting crucial information. "Staff Sergeant, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to give me a direct answer. What was the actual nature of your conversation with Corporal Chun?" Reeves hesitated. We were talking about military matters." "That's not an answer. Were you asking her for a date?" The question hung in the air. Reeves realized that his carefully constructed story was beginning to fall apart under professional scrutiny. "That's not relevant to the assault complaint," he said finally. "Actually, it's very relevant. Because if you were harassing Corporal Chun and this civilian intervened, that changes the entire context of the situation." Peterson had investigated dozens of sexual harassment complaints during his career. He recognized the pattern. Aggressive male service member pursues reluctant female service member. Situation escalates. Complaint filed that conveniently omits the harassment context. "I wasn't harassing anyone," Reeves said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm going to need to interview Corporal Chun as part of this investigation," Peterson said. "And I'm going to need the full name and contact information for this Maria Santos." "I don't know her full contact information. She works at the VA hospital." Peterson made another note. "Maria Santos va hospital." "Got it." What Peterson didn't tell Reeves was that the name Maria Santos had immediately triggered a memory. Several months ago, there had been a briefing about a new counselor at the VA hospital who was a retired Navy veteran. He couldn't remember the details, but something about her service record had been notable enough that the base commander had mentioned it during a staff meeting. After Reeves left, Peterson pulled up the military personnel database and did a quick search for Maria Santos. What he found made him sit back in his chair and whistle low under his breath. Maria Elena Santos, Lieutenant Commander, retired, United States Navy. 25 years of active duty service. Multiple combat deployments. Decorated veteran with commendations for valor under fire. Current position, Senior Counselor, Veterans Affairs Hospital. But it was the notation in her service record that really caught Peterson's attention. Most of her operational history was classified, but there were enough details available to make it clear that Maria Santos was not just any retired Navy veteran. She was a former SEAL. Peterson had been in the military long enough to understand what that meant. The Navy SEALs were the most elite special operations force in the world. Their training was legendary for its intensity and difficulty. The fact that Maria Santos had not only completed SEAL training, but had served for 25 years meant she was extraordinary even by their standards. And Derek Reeves had just filed an assault complaint against her. Peterson picked up his phone and dialed the number for the base commander's office. This was not the kind of situation he could handle through normal channels. If a retired SEAL was involved in an incident with an active duty Marine, especially one that might involve sexual harassment allegations, this was going to require very careful handling. "Colonel Morrison's office," answered the commander's aide. "This is Desk Sergeant Peterson at the MP station. I need to speak with the colonel about a situation that requires immediate attention." While Peterson was making his phone call, Maria Santos was beginning her workday at the VA hospital, completely unaware that her encounter with Derek Reeves was about to become a much larger issue. She had arrived early, as was her habit, and was reviewing her patient files for the day when her supervisor, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, knocked on her office door. "Maria, do you have a moment?" "Of course," Maria replied, looking up from her paperwork. Dr. Walsh's expression was more serious than usual, which immediately put Maria on alert. I just received a call from the base military police. Apparently, there was some kind of incident yesterday involving you and an active duty Marine. Maria's face remained neutral, but internally she sighed. She had hoped that her encounter with Reeves would end with the lesson she had taught him at the commissary. Apparently, he had decided to escalate the situation. There was a brief interaction at the commissary, Maria said carefully. A Marine was harassing a female service member. I intervened. Dr. Walsh sat down across from Maria's desk. The MP mentioned that this Marine is claiming you assaulted him. Did he mention what led to that alleged assault? He claims it was an unprovoked attack during a casual conversation. Maria nodded. I see. And did the MP indicate whether they plan to interview the female service member who was being harassed? They're planning a full investigation. Maria, I have to ask, given your background, if this Marine was harassing someone, did you use your training to intervene? The question was delicately phrased. Dr. Walsh was one of the few people at the VA who had been briefed on Maria's actual service record. She understood that intervention by a former SEAL could take forms that most people couldn't imagine. I used the minimum force necessary to de-escalate a situation where a female service member was being intimidated and threatened, Maria replied. No permanent harm was done, and the situation was resolved peacefully. Dr. Walsh studied her for a moment. How much trouble are we looking at here? That depends on how thorough the investigation is, and whether Staff Sergeant Reeves continues to pursue this complaint once he learns more about my background. He doesn't know who you are. I introduced myself as Maria Santos from the VA hospital. I didn't mention my rank or service history. Dr. Walsh almost smiled at that. So he filed an assault complaint against a retired Navy SEAL without realizing that's what he was doing? It appears so. Maria, I need to ask you directly. Did you do anything that could be considered excessive force? Maria considered the question carefully. I used pressure point techniques to control an aggressive individual who was threatening both me and another service member. The techniques I used are designed to cause temporary discomfort without permanent injury. They are well within the scope of what any military police officer might use in a similar situation. But you're not a military police officer anymore. You're a civilian contractor. That's true. But I'm also a veteran with a legal right to defend myself and others from threats. And I'm someone who has received extensive training in how to use minimum necessary force to neutralize threats without causing permanent harm. Dr. Walsh nodded slowly. I'm going to need to report this to the hospital administration. And you're probably going to need to speak with the base MPs. I understand. Maria? Off the record, how bad did you hurt this guy? Maria's expression remained professional, but there was the slightest hint of satisfaction in her voice when she replied. He experienced approximately 30 seconds of moderate discomfort. He'll be fine. And how bad could you have hurt him if you'd wanted to? The question hung in the air for a moment before Maria answered. Dr. Walsh, I spent 25 years learning how to neutralize threats to American lives and interests. Staff Sergeant Reeves is very fortunate that all I wanted to do was teach him a lesson in basic human decency. As Dr. Walsh left her office, Maria returned to her patient files, but her mind was already working through the potential complications of Reeves' complaint. She had dealt with military bureaucracy for most of her adult life, and she understood how these situations could unfold. The investigation would uncover her service record. Once that happened, the entire context of the incident would change. Reeves would realize that his unprovoked assault claim was not going to be taken seriously once the investigators learned that he had been harassing a female service member and had then threatened a decorated combat veteran. But there was another possibility that concerned her more. If word of this incident spread through the base, it might compromise the quiet retirement she had been building for herself. She had chosen to work at the VA hospital precisely because it allowed her to serve veterans while maintaining a low profile. She didn't want to become known as the former SEAL who works at the hospital. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Maria Santos, she answered. Miss Santos? This is Sergeant Peterson with the base military police. I understand there was an incident yesterday at the commissary involving you and Staff Sergeant Derek Reeves. That's correct. Would you be available to come in for an interview this afternoon? I'd like to get your statement about what happened. Of course. What time would be convenient? How about 1,400 hours? I'll be there. After hanging up, Maria sat back in her chair and considered her options. She could provide a straightforward account of what had happened, focusing on Reeves' harassment of Lisa Chun and her own minimal intervention. She could emphasize that no lasting harm had been done and that the situation had been resolved peacefully. Or she could provide a more complete account that included exactly who Derek Reeves had decided to threaten and what that meant for his future in the Marine Corps. Looking at her patient files case after case of veterans struggling with the aftermath of military service, dealing with trauma and loss, and the difficulty of transitioning to civilian life, Maria made her decision. Some lessons were important enough that they needed to be taught thoroughly. Staff Sergeant Derek Reeves was about to receive an education that would change his entire perspective on power, respect, and the consequences of his choices. And this time, the lesson would be administered by the United States Military Police, with Maria Santos serving as their very knowledgeable expert witness. At exactly 1,400 hours, Maria Santos walked into the military police station wearing her best professional attire, a crisp white blouse, navy blue blazer, and pressed slacks. Her appearance was impeccable, her bearing confident and composed. To anyone who knew how to read military body language, she looked like exactly what she was, a career officer who had spent decades in positions of significant responsibility. Sergeant Peterson was waiting for her in the main office, along with another man she didn't recognize. As she approached the desk, Peterson stood and extended his hand. "Miss Santos, I am Sergeant Peterson. Thank you for coming in." "Of course," Maria replied, shaking his hand with a firm grip that Peterson immediately recognized as distinctly military. "How can I help with your investigation?" "I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Colonel Morrison," Peterson said, gesturing to the other man. "He's the base commander." Maria's eyes sharpened slightly. Having the base commander present for what should have been a routine witness interview suggested that this situation had already escalated beyond normal channels. "Colonel Morrison," she said, offering another firm handshake. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Morrison studied her carefully. He had reviewed her service file before this meeting, and he was curious to see how the person matched the impressive record on paper. What he saw was a woman who carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command, who met his gaze directly without being confrontational, and who radiated the kind of calm competence that came from decades of high-pressure situations. "Ms. Santos, I understand you're working at the VA hospital now." "That's correct, sir. I'm a senior counselor, working primarily with combat veterans. And before that, 25 years with the Navy." Morrison nodded. He had already known this, but he wanted to see how she would present her background. Her answer was accurate, but understated, which was exactly what he would have expected from someone with her training. "Please, have a seat," Peterson said, indicating a chair across from his desk. "I'd like to get your account of what happened yesterday evening at the commissary." Maria settled into the chair with the same economy of movement she had displayed in the grocery store. "Certainly. I was shopping for groceries when I observed Staff Sergeant Reeves engaged in what appeared to be harassment of Corporal Chun. The situation seemed to be escalating, so I intervened." "Can you be more specific about what you observed?" Morrison asked. Corporal Chun was clearly trying to disengage from the conversation, but Staff Sergeant Reeves was using his physical size and position to prevent her from leaving. He had positioned himself so that she was trapped against a display case. When she repeatedly declined his invitation for a date, he became more aggressive and insistent. Peterson made notes as she spoke. "And how did you choose to intervene?" "Initially, I attempted to provide Corporal Chun with an opportunity to leave by engaging Staff Sergeant Reeves in conversation. I hoped that the presence of a witness would cause him to modify his behavior. But that didn't work." "No." Staff Sergeant Reeves became increasingly aggressive. He told me to mind my own business, used derogatory language, and eventually made verbal threats. Morrison leaned forward slightly. "What kind of threats?" He suggested that I might find out what it feels like to deal with someone who doesn't take disrespect from civilians. When I asked him to clarify what he meant, he became more explicit about his intention to physically intimidate me. And then, He reached for my arm in an attempt to grab me. At that point, I used defensive techniques to protect myself. Peterson looked up from his notes. Can you describe these defensive techniques? Maria chose her words carefully. I used pressure point control techniques to immobilize his attacking arm and prevent him from following through with his assault. The techniques were designed to cause temporary discomfort without permanent injury. Where did you learn these techniques? Morrison asked, though he already knew the answer. During my military service. There was a moment of silence in the room. Morrison and Peterson exchanged glances, both recognizing that they had reached the crucial point in the interview. Ms. Santos, Morrison said slowly, Staff Sergeant Reeves claims that you assaulted him without provocation. He describes your intervention as an unprovoked attack by a civilian. Maria's expression remained neutral. Staff Sergeant Reeves is entitled to his perspective on the events. But you would characterize it differently? I would characterize it as a defensive response to threatened assault by an individual who was already engaged in harassment and intimidation of a junior service member. Peterson set down his pen and looked directly at Maria. Ms. Santos, I've reviewed your service record. I know that you're not just any retired Navy veteran. Maria said nothing, waiting to see where this was leading. You served with the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Morrison continued. 25 years. Multiple combat deployments. Decorated for valor under fire. The room fell silent again. The weight of this information settled over the conversation like a heavy blanket. Staff Sergeant Reeves doesn't know any of this, does he? Peterson asked. I introduced myself as Maria Santos from the VA hospital. I didn't see any need to discuss my service history in a grocery store. Morrison almost smiled at that. So when he filed his assault complaint, he had no idea that he was accusing a former Navy SEAL of attacking him? Apparently not. Peterson looked at his notes again, then back at Maria. Ms. Santos, in your professional opinion, do you believe Staff Sergeant Reeves' behavior constituted sexual harassment? In my professional opinion, Staff Sergeant Reeves was engaged in a pattern of behavior that created a hostile environment for Corporal Chun. He used his rank, his physical size, and his position to intimidate a junior service member into compliance with his personal demands. When she repeatedly declined his advances, he escalated to more aggressive tactics designed to wear down her resistance. And when you intervened, he attempted to use the same intimidation tactics on me. The difference was that I had the training and experience to respond appropriately to his escalation. Morrison studied her for a long moment. Ms. Santos, how much force did you actually use? The absolute minimum necessary to neutralize the threat and de-escalate the situation. Staff Sergeant Reeves experienced temporary discomfort lasting approximately 30 seconds. He suffered no injury, no lasting effects, and no damage to his pride except what came from learning that his intimidation tactics don't work on everyone. Could you have done more damage if you had chosen to? The question was direct and professional. Morrison was a career military officer who understood the capabilities represented by Maria's training and experience. Colonel Morrison, I could have ended that confrontation in any number of ways, ranging from simply embarrassing Staff Sergeant Reeves to ensuring that he never harassed another woman again. I chose the option that taught him a lesson while preserving his ability to learn from it. The implicit threat in her words was delivered with the same calm professionalism she had maintained throughout the interview, but its meaning was unmistakable. Peterson cleared his throat. We've also scheduled an interview with Corporal Chun. Would you expect her account to corroborate your version of events? I would expect Corporal Chun to provide an honest account of what happened. Whether that corroborates my version or Staff Sergeant Reeves' version will depend on which version is more accurate. And in your opinion? In my opinion, Corporal Chun will describe being harassed by Staff Sergeant Reeves until I provided her with an opportunity to escape the situation. I doubt she will describe my intervention as an unprovoked assault. Morrison nodded slowly. Ms. Santos, I have to ask, why didn't you simply call for security or military police when you observed Staff Sergeant Reeves harassing Corporal Chun? It was a fair question, and Maria considered her answer carefully. Colonel Morrison, in my experience, harassment and intimidation tactics work because they rely on the victim feeling isolated and helpless. By the time security could have been summoned, the immediate situation would have been over, and Staff Sergeant Reeves would have learned that his behavior has no immediate consequences. I chose to provide immediate consequences, and you felt qualified to make that judgment? I felt qualified to recognize predatory behavior and respond appropriately to a threat. The same skills that served me during my military career remain relevant in civilian life. Peterson looked through his notes one more time, then set them aside. Ms. Santos, based on your account and the information we have available, it seems clear that Staff Sergeant Reeves' complaint does not accurately represent what occurred. That would be for you to determine, Sergeant Peterson. However, Morrison added, there is still the question of whether your response was appropriate for a civilian contractor. Maria looked at him steadily. Colonel Morrison, I am a retired military officer who observed the harassment and intimidation of a junior service member by a senior NCO. I'm also a woman who was subsequently threatened with physical violence for intervening in that harassment. I responded with precisely the amount of force necessary to protect both Corporal Chun and myself, while ensuring that Staff Sergeant Reeves learned something important about the consequences of his behavior. And what lesson was that? That his assumptions about power, authority, and vulnerability might be dangerously incorrect. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, but the essential facts were already clear. Maria's account was detailed, consistent, and delivered with the kind of calm precision that came from years of professional briefings and debriefings. When pressed for details, she provided them without hesitation. When asked about her decision-making process, she explained her reasoning with the analytical clarity of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. By the time the interview concluded, both Morrison and Peterson had a very clear picture of what had actually happened at the commissary. After Maria left, Morrison and Peterson sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the implications of what they had learned. So, Peterson said finally, Derek Reeves sexually harassed a junior service member, threatened a decorated Navy SEAL, and then filed a complaint claiming that he was the victim of an unprovoked assault. That appears to be an accurate summary, Morrison replied. And now we have to interview Corporal Chun and see if her account matches what Ms. Santos told us. I suspect it will. Peterson looked at the complaint form that Reeves had filed. Colonel, what do we do with this? Morrison considered the question carefully. First, we complete the investigation properly. We interview Corporal Chun. We review any security camera footage from the commissary. We document everything thoroughly. And then we have a conversation with Staff Sergeant Reeves about his future in the Marine Corps. Peterson understood the implication. Sexual harassment was a career-ending offense. Filing a false complaint was a serious disciplinary matter. And the combination of both, especially when it involved making false accusations against a decorated veteran, was likely to result in Reeves' immediate separation from military. Do you think Ms. Santos wants to pursue any charges against Reeves? Morrison shook his head. I don't think Maria Santos needs the military justice system to handle Derek Reeves. I think she's already handled him quite effectively. What do you mean? Think about it, Peterson. Right now, Derek Reeves is walking around this base believing that he filed a legitimate complaint against a woman who assaulted him. He has no idea that his complaint is going to result in a sexual harassment investigation that will probably end his military career. He has no idea that the woman he thinks he can intimidate is someone who could have killed him with her bare hands. And he has no idea that his behavior yesterday was observed and evaluated by one of the most highly trained warriors in the American military. Peterson whistled low. He's about to find out, though. Yes, he is. And I suspect that when he does, he's going to realize that Maria Santos gave him the most valuable lesson of his life. She could have destroyed him yesterday, physically, professionally, or both. Instead, she chose to teach him something that might actually make him a better person, if he's smart enough to learn from it. Morrison stood and walked to the window, looking out at the base where Marines and sailors went about their daily routines, most of them completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded in their commissary the night before. Peterson, in all your years of military police work, have you ever seen anything quite like this? You mean a decorated Navy SEAL using minimal force to teach a sexual predator a lesson in respect while shopping for pasta sauce? No, sir. This is definitely a first. Morrison smiled grimly. Derek Reeves has no idea how lucky he is. He could have spent the rest of his life wondering what would have happened if he had actually tried to assault the wrong woman. Instead, he got a very gentle demonstration of exactly how that would have gone. Do you think he'll figure that out? Eventually, after we finish our investigation and he realizes that his complaint has backfired completely, he's going to do some research on Maria Santos. And when he discovers exactly who she is and what she's capable of, he's going to understand just how much restraint she showed. Peterson gathered up his notes and prepared to leave. I'll schedule the interview with Corporal Chun for tomorrow morning. Good. And Peterson? Yes, sir. When we do interview Corporal Chun, I want you to emphasize that she's not in any trouble. This investigation is about Staff Sergeant Reeves' behavior, not hers. I want her to feel safe telling us exactly what happened. Understood, sir. As Peterson left to prepare for the next day's interviews, Morrison remained at the window, thinking about leadership, about power, and about the difference between strength and bullying. In his 23 years of military service, he had met many warriors, but few who combined Maria Santos' level of capability with such precise judgment and restraint. Derek Reeves had learned something important yesterday, even if he didn't realize it yet. He had learned that his assumptions about the world might be wrong, that his behavior had consequences, and that there were people who would not tolerate his abuse of power. The question now was whether he was smart enough to understand the gift he had been given, or whether his pride and arrogance would blind him to the lesson until it was too late to benefit from it. Either way, his military career was about to take a very different direction than he had planned. The next morning, Corporal Lisa Chun sat in the military police station feeling a mixture of nervousness and relief. She had been dreading this interview since receiving the call yesterday afternoon, but she was also grateful that someone was finally taking Staff Sergeant Reeves' behavior seriously. Sergeant Peterson and Lieutenant Colonel Morrison sat across from her, their expressions professional but reassuring. Peterson had begun the interview by emphasizing that she was not under investigation and that they simply needed her honest account of what had happened at the commissary. Take your time, Corporal, Peterson said gently. Just tell us what happened from the beginning. Lisa took a deep breath and began her story. She described going to the commissary for groceries, encountering Staff Sergeant Reeves, and his persistent attempts to pressure her into going out with him despite her repeated refusals. He wouldn't let me leave, she explained. Every time I tried to step around him, he would move to block my path. He kept saying things like, "Come on, just one drink, and don't be like that." I kept telling him no, but he wouldn't listen. Morrison leaned forward slightly. How did his behavior make you feel? Scared, Lisa admitted. He's so much bigger than me, and he was using that to intimidate me. I felt trapped, like he wasn't going to let me leave until I agreed to what he wanted. Peterson made notes as she spoke. And then what happened? That's when the woman appeared. Maria Santos. She just started talking to him like everything was normal, but somehow she managed to give me a chance to breathe. At first, I thought maybe he would back off because there was a witness. But he didn't. No, he got angry at her for interrupting. He told her to mind her own business, called her names, and started threatening her. I couldn't believe it. Here was this woman trying to help me, and he was being just as awful to her as he had been to me. Lisa continued her account, describing how the situation had escalated, how Reeves had attempted to grab Maria, and how Maria had somehow managed to neutralize his aggression without causing any apparent harm. It happened so fast, Lisa said. One moment he was reaching for her, and the next moment he was bent over looking like he was in pain. But she wasn't hitting him or anything violent like that. She was just controlling him somehow. What happened after that? Morrison asked. He apologized to me. Actually apologized. I've never seen Staff Sergeant Reeves apologize to anyone for anything. And then he left. Just walked away like nothing had happened. Peterson showed her the complaint that Reeves had filed. Corporal Chun, Staff Sergeant Reeves claims that Ms. Santos assaulted him without provocation. He says she interfered in a normal conversation and then attacked him. Lisa stared at the paper in disbelief. That's not what happened at all. He was harassing me. She saved me from a situation that was getting worse by the minute. If she hadn't shown up, Lisa trailed off, not wanting to complete that thought. In your opinion, Morrison said carefully, was Staff Sergeant Reeves' behavior toward you appropriate? No, sir. It was harassment. Sexual harassment. He wouldn't take no for an answer. He used his rank and size to intimidate me, and he made it clear that he wasn't going to let me leave until I gave him what he wanted. Peterson made a final note and set down his pen. Corporal Chun, is there anything else about this incident that you think we should know? Lisa considered the question. Sir, I want to thank Miss Santos somehow. I don't know who she is or why she helped me, but I'm grateful. Staff Sergeant Reeves has been persistent for weeks. No one has ever stood up to him before. After Lisa left, Morrison and Peterson compared her account with Maria's statement and found them to be virtually identical in all material details. The evidence was overwhelming. Derek Reeves had sexually harassed a junior service member, escalated to threatening behavior when confronted, and then filed a false complaint to cover up his misconduct. We need to bring Reeves in, Morrison said. It's time he learned exactly what kind of trouble he's in. 2 hours later, Derek Reeves sat in the same chair that Maria and Lisa had occupied, but his experience was vastly different. Instead of being treated as a witness or victim, he was clearly being interrogated as a suspect. Morrison had decided to handle this interview personally. As the base commander, he wanted Reeves to understand the seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences of his actions. Staff Sergeant Reeves, Morrison began, we've completed our investigation into your complaint against Maria Santos. We've also investigated the events that led to your encounter with Ms. Santos. Reeves shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Something about Morrison's tone suggested that this conversation was not going to go the way he had expected. We've interviewed Corporal Chun, Peterson added. Her account of the evening differs significantly from what you told us. What did she say? Reeves asked, though his voice lacked the confidence he had displayed when filing his original complaint. Morrison leaned back in his chair and studied Reeves with the cold assessment of a career military officer who had dealt with problem soldiers before. She said you sexually harassed her. She said you used your rank and physical size to intimidate her into compliance with your personal demands. She said you trapped her against a display case and refused to let her leave when she repeatedly declined your advances. Reeves' face went pale. That's not. We were just talking. It wasn't harassment. Really. Morrison's voice carried the skeptical tone of someone who had heard this defense many times before. Because according to Corporal Chun, you spent several minutes pressuring her for a date despite her repeated refusals. You blocked her attempts to leave the conversation. And you made it clear that you wouldn't let her go until she agreed to your demands. She's exaggerating. It wasn't like that. Peterson opened his notebook. Let me read you some quotes from her statement. He wouldn't let me leave. Every time I tried to step around him, he would move to block my path. I felt trapped, like he wasn't going to let me leave until I agreed to what he wanted. Does that sound like exaggeration to you, Staff Sergeant? Reeves said nothing, but sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. Morrison continued the interrogation. Now, let's talk about your interaction with Maria Santos. You claim she assaulted you without provocation. But, according to both Corporal Chun and Ms. Santos herself, you became aggressive toward Ms. Santos when she attempted to help Corporal Chun escape from your harassment. She interfered in a private conversation. No, Staff Sergeant. She intervened in a sexual harassment situation. And when she did, you threatened her with physical violence. Morrison pulled out a copy of Maria's statement. According to Ms. Santos, you told her she might find out what it feels like to deal with someone who doesn't take disrespect from civilians. You used derogatory language toward her, and you attempted to physically grab her arm. She was being disrespectful to a Marine NCO, Reeves protested weakly. She was protecting a junior service member from sexual harassment, Morrison corrected. And you responded by threatening a decorated military veteran. The word veteran seemed to confuse Reeves. What do you mean, veteran? Morrison and Peterson exchanged glances. This was the moment they had both been waiting for. Staff Sergeant Reeves, Morrison said slowly, do you know who Maria Santos is? She's some civilian who works at the VA hospital. She's a retired Navy lieutenant commander with 25 years of active duty service. She's a decorated combat veteran with multiple deployments to hostile theaters. And She's a former member of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Reeves stared at Morrison in confusion. What's the Naval Special Warfare Development Group? Peterson couldn't hide his amazement at Reeves' ignorance. Staff Sergeant, the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, is the official name for SEAL Team 6. Maria Santos is a retired Navy SEAL. The color drained completely from Reeves' face as the implications of this information sank in. The woman he had threatened, the woman he had accused of assaulting him, the woman he had dismissed as a powerless civilian, was one of the most elite warriors in the American military. "That's not possible," he whispered. "It's not only possible, it's documented fact," Morrison replied. "Ms. Santos spent a quarter-century serving her country in some of the most dangerous operations conducted by the U.S. military. She has more combat experience, more advanced training, and more real-world leadership experience than you will accumulate in 10 lifetimes." Reeves sat in stunned silence as his entire understanding of the previous evening's event collapsed around him. Morrison continued relentlessly. "So let me make sure I understand your complaint correctly. You sexually harassed a junior female service member. When a decorated Navy SEAL intervened to protect her, you threatened that SEAL with physical violence. And when she used minimal force to neutralize your aggression, you filed a complaint claiming that you were the victim of an unprovoked assault." "I didn't know." Reeves started. "You didn't know what? That sexual harassment is illegal? That threatening violence against women is unacceptable? That your behavior has consequences?" Peterson leaned forward. "Staff Sergeant, here's what you need to understand. Ms. Santos could have ended your military career yesterday evening. She could have seriously injured you. She could have filed charges against you for assault, for harassment, for threatening behavior. Instead, she chose to give you a lesson in basic human decency using the minimum force necessary." Morrison stood and walked around the desk to stand directly in front of Reeves. "Staff Sergeant, you are facing charges of sexual harassment, making false official statements, and filing a fraudulent complaint. These are career-ending offenses that will result in your immediate separation from the Marine Corps under less than honorable conditions." "Sir, please, however," Morrison continued, "Ms. Santos has indicated that she has no desire to press additional charges against you. She considers the matter resolved. So your immediate future depends on two things: your willingness to take full responsibility for your actions and your ability to learn from this experience." Reeves looked up hopefully. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you have exactly one opportunity to salvage something from this situation. You will publicly apologize to Corporal Chun for your harassment. You will attend mandatory counseling on sexual harassment and appropriate workplace behavior. You will accept whatever administrative punishment is deemed appropriate for your misconduct. And you will never, ever engage in this type of behavior again. And if I do all that," Morrison's expression remained stern, "then you might be allowed to complete your current enlistment before being separated from the Marine Corps. You will not be promoted. You will not be recommended for re-enlistment. And you will spend the remainder of your military service understanding that you are being closely monitored. The alternative hung unspoken in the air: immediate court-martial, dishonorable discharge, and the lifelong consequences of being convicted of sexual harassment." Reeves nodded frantically. "Yes, sir. I understand. I'll do whatever you require." "Good. Because, Staff Sergeant, you came very close to destroying your life yesterday evening. The only reason you're sitting here with any options at all is because Maria Santos showed you more mercy than you showed Corporal Chun." As Reeves was escorted out to begin his administrative processing, Morrison reflected on the strange justice of the situation. A decorated Navy SEAL had used minimal force to protect a junior service member from a sexual predator, and in doing so had probably saved that predator from the much worse fate that would have befallen him if he had continued his pattern of behavior unchecked. Peterson knocked on Morrison's door later that afternoon. "Sir, I just received word that Staff Sergeant Reeves has requested voluntary separation from the Marine Corps. He's withdrawing his assault complaint and has agreed to all the conditions you outlined." "Smart choice," Morrison replied. "What about Corporal Chun?" "She's been notified that the matter is closed and that Staff Sergeant Reeves will not be bothering her again. She asked if there was some way she could thank Ms. Santos." Morrison smiled. "I think Ms. Santos considers Corporal Chun's safety to be thanks enough." Later that evening, Maria Santos finished her workout at the base gym and was walking to her car when she noticed a familiar figure approaching. Derek Reeves walked toward her slowly. His entire demeanor changed from the aggressive confidence he had displayed 2 days earlier. He stopped about 10 feet away, far enough to show that he posed no threat, close enough to speak without raising his voice. "Ms. Santos," he said quietly. Maria turned to face him, her expression neutral, but alert. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, I wanted to apologize. For my behavior. For everything." Maria studied him for a moment. The arrogant bully from the commissary was gone, replaced by someone who had clearly undergone a fundamental reassessment of his assumptions about the world. "Your apology should go to Corporal Chun,"